Welcome to MSL Talk with Tom Caravela, a podcast specifically designed for MSLs and all things field medical. Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. Today, my guest is Jonathan Horvath, who is an MSL director and former MSL, and we talk about the most difficult parts of being an MSL and how to overcome them. So great conversation. Hope you guys enjoy it. Hey, Jonathan, how's it going, man? Thanks for joining me.
Good. How are you?
I'm awesome. I'm looking forward to catching up and always love talking to you. And I know you have a lot of good stuff to share. So thank you. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
No problem. It's a nice cold winter day here in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm sure.
And what else? What else are we doing? Let's do a podcast.
Why not? Just snow on the ground. It's January. It's 2021. Let's move on.
Awesome, man. So let's start. Why don't we do a quick intro? Tell everybody, who you are and where you're from and what you're up to, that kind of thing.
Sure. So I'm originally from New York, so not too far away from where you are. And I'm now in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm a PharmD by training. Did my schooling in Long Island University in Brooklyn, New York. And I was lucky enough to get a Rutgers Fellowship, be part of the Rutgers Fellowship program. I started there at Bristol Myers Squibb Medical Information in the virology team. Right after that, I did become a full-time employee at BMS, and I was mostly in the diabetes franchise, so doing medical information for about 2 years. Mm-hmm. And after that, I went to Boehringer Ingelheim and was a medical science liaison in the Northeast for about 4 years, and then decided to take a different path of being in big pharma and go to a startup company. And that's where I went to Dovo Pharmaceuticals, where it was mostly highlighting in rare disease, where I was an MSL, and then eventually was leading the MSL team at the company.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Yeah. I forgot that we were both fellow Rutgers alum.
Yes.
How tough was it to get that fellowship? I know that those are kind of tough to get, but once you get them, it's like, it helps you really write your ticket.
Honestly, it really propelled me into the industry. It was very challenging. It's very lucrative. And I think now, there's a lot more other fellowship programs, even outside of Rutgers, that have recently been budded the last few years. So I think there's more opportunities there, which I think is great. But I did have to go to the mid-year meeting and interview, just like you did for a residency. My original goal was to either get a residency or a fellowship, because either or is a great opportunity to get into the industry in general. Mm-hmm. And luckily enough, I was able to land a position at Bristol Myers Squibb and be part of their team. So it's ever propelled me for my career, and I'm very thankful and grateful for that opportunity.
Awesome. Yeah, man. I'll tell you, and you've had a great career. I mean, obviously, so you went from a fellowship, you became an MSL, became an MSL director. So you have experience, hiring and coaching, mentoring, and managing MSL. So let's get to kind of the point of the topic today, which is, the challenges and the difficulties of being an MSL. So let's talk about that. What would you say is one of the toughest parts about?
Sure. And I think it's a very broad question, right? Because there's a lot of different categories we can go into. We can definitely go into them, I think, as well. I think generally speaking, I think the most difficult thing is really understanding what the role is and being successful on a day-to-day basis. And there's different successes that one may have either on a day-to-day, month-to-month, or even year-to-year. And that's going to vary, of course. And I think those difficulties are going to be a challenge across the industry for different MSLs at different companies, because every MSL role is actually different at every company, depending where you are at. So I think have a true understanding of the role is really important, because especially now during the pandemic, I would say typically it takes about a year for somebody new to the role to really grasp and understand what they're doing and feel confident in what they're doing on a day-to-day. I think now in the pandemic, it's kind of maybe lengthened that growth out, maybe about a year and a half now. And it really is going to depend. I'm kind of just ballparking it just for context purposes. And it really depends on what the resources you have around you too. And I think it's very important to leverage the resources that you have and the expertise that you have around you as well.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of, I know it's very broad the way
I
approached it,
but that's a great way to start, because I think that for aspiring MSLs, for newer MSLs, and even for experienced MSLs, I think it's really important to fully understand what you're signing on for. So for example, if you're a newer MSL or an aspiring MSL, you really need to know what the role is because you're going to be asked in an interview. If you're a newer MSL or an aspiring MSL, it's probably a good idea to try to talk to folks within the organization, see who you know, or study the job description to the point, or even ask your recruiter to the point where you can see what the nuances are within that organization, so that when you go into the interview or when you go into the job, you fully understand what they feel the requirements are. I mean, does that make sense?
Absolutely. Some companies have their MSLs be completely reactive, where they're not actively, proactively going out and trying to obtain appointments with KOLs, key opinion leaders, or thought leaders, thought liaisons, whatever nomenclature that you use. So I think that's something that's really important because it's going to vary, and your day-to-day will vary as well too. Is your territory just driving? Does it also include flying? When do I fly? When do I drive?
Yep. Yeah.
A lot of different nuances that do occur. And I would say that wherever anybody is in their career on the MSL path, new, aspiring, seasoned, I think the biggest key overall for success is going to be organization of your territory. When you are in the MSL of your territory, you own that territory. So if anybody in the organization asks you about Dr. So-and-so or anybody in your territory, it's going to fall back on you no matter what, because that is your territory and you own it from a medical perspective. And there's a lot of different tips and tricks that you could use in regards to organization. And I think that's going to hold true for anybody in the industry, even outside of the MSL role too. But I think organization is really key, because that is going to help you become successful and help you get into a routine outside of that first year. Because that first year is really a trial period.
Yeah.
In the role. And then you really get comfortable and start building relationships even further and subsequently in the future months and years.
So that makes sense. So organization being one of the challenges of being a good MSL, being a good new MSL. So like when someone joins an organization or someone is in an organization, do they get trained on that? Like what kind of support is there, and how do they protect themselves from developing an unorganized system or not being as organized as the company wants them to be?
Sure. And I think it's really going to depend on where you are in your career, or if you're a new MSL, new to industry in general, because that's just the whole learning, just the industry of itself, or if you're a seasoned MSL. And most seasoned MSLs, I would say, have their routine of what they feel is organized for themselves. And of course, I would never want to say what things work for me may not work for other people too. But usually whenever I have a new hire or someone new to the industry, I do let them know of what's given me success in the past, of just managing your email, how to manage your territory itself, what's the appropriate way to kind of block time in your territory or block time in your calendar to say, I'm going to be in Michigan at the end of the month, and then the week after I'll be in DC. Like, you have to block things off so it sets you up for success. That's just kind of a little bit of a background there.
Yeah. So as a manager, as an MSL leader, is that part of your everyday responsibility, is to spearhead and get ahead of what you see as the normal difficulties of an MSL on your team? Like, is that just really one of the things that you look out for?
Sure. And I think, when especially folks that are newer to the industry or newer in their career, trying to help them and guide them, of giving them resources and tools to help them be successful, because, they're juggling a lot, just trying to get appointments and meetings, also understand the science too, right? There's a science component to all this as well, which is the core function of medical affairs. So there's like a 4 to 6 week training, which mostly is didactic, but of course there is some other pearls as well. And usually, even when I was an MSL, I was given a mentor, and a formal mentor at my company. And we've also, while I was a manager, also instituted the same type of function, if you will, because it does help someone always being with you, and because there's always going to be a lot of questions that are going to be asked during a new hire. So we do try to group people up. And also I would be a resource as well, just to give my perspective.
Yeah. Okay. So you're an MSL, you have a great manager, you have mentors. So you have folks in place to help you get trained, help you understand how to get through some of the difficulties, some of the challenges, keep you on track. But, there's always going to be challenges. There's always going to be difficulties. So let's talk about that. One of the things I'm sure, especially now with COVID, that is difficult is KOL access and being able to get in front of, your KOLs. So how do you navigate that as a manager, or what advice do you have for folks that are either newer or they're experienced MSLs? They're just having a difficult time with it.
Oh, and that's the full gamut, just like as you mentioned. And now more than ever, access is an even harder thing to obtain because of everything is mostly virtual right now. So that's a whole new dynamic from the industry standpoint and also from a KOL standpoint. And access has always been an issue. If you're new, you're seasoned, it's going to be an issue regardless. And there's also more restrictions that are being in place for some institutions that aren't allowing pharma folks to even go in for meetings, even including medical, even though MSLs do have a little more latitude in regards to access, but they still do get restrictive. And there's some institutions that are out there that also are just known to be fully restrictive. I will say that it's really important to leverage all the different options that you have, right? Okay. In order to get KOL access. And that could vary. And one thing that I've utilized while I was MSL and also instituted while I was a manager, and this is going to vary too across companies because of compliance issues in regards to how you work with some of your commercial counterparts. And that firewall may exist, it may not exist. There's usually some type of firewall that does exist. It all depends on the wrinkles and what is and what is not allowed. I will have to say, though, that my commercial counterparts helped me out tremendously. Okay. I advocate for anybody on the MSL team to utilize them as a resource, because, if they can, of course, if it's compliant, because sometimes they have relationships. They're going into those offices more frequently than an MSL might. They may be going in once a week, whereas an MSL might be going in once a quarter. Mm-hmm. So they may know some of the other staff maybe that you're not planning on seeing, but they may be able to help you get an introduction, which is something that's been allowed at previous companies, or may also let you know of who to reach out to. Maybe, talk to this nurse. She's the gatekeeper to get to Dr. Mm-hmm. So-and-so. That's always something that has also been helpful too.
Yeah. So rely on some, internal resources, be creative, utilize every means of trying to get face time is essentially what you're saying.
And I was just going on the sales folks, but I think there's other opportunities too. Also maybe other MSLs that may know of those individuals at those institutions. I would say anybody in medical affairs that may have a relationship. Doing a typical PubMed search is always helpful to see if they've published something, and that may have an inside way to kind of reach out to them in an email to say, hey, Dr. So-and-so, I recently saw that you had something published. I'd love to pick your brain or touch base on this. Even though it's not really your objective, it's a way to get in there. And that's really what's important is, how do I get in there now to benefit myself later? And that's something you always have to keep in mind. Being an MSL, it's not about today, it's always about tomorrow and the future. Right. Because you want this to be a long-standing relationship. This is not a one-time off meeting where you're trying to tell them everything you have going on at the company. You kind of give them little bits, and eventually you get a better relationship, and therefore they'll have continuous contact with them. And I say that definitely has happened numerous times throughout my career, where you may have a difficult time getting access to somebody. It may take a year even. I've been there, and it's frustrating because sometimes you do feel that your email does go into an abyss at times, but then you have that eureka moment where you may meet them at a conference, a regional conference or national conference, or they miraculously respond to your email saying, yeah, that sounds great. Let's touch base. And you have to take advantage of those opportunities. And then before you know it, 2 years later, you have continuous relationship with them and you're on a texting basis. So those opportunities do happen. And I say patience is really key, and persistence without being too too much of a nuisance, because you don't want to email folks or be a pest or call the office, too much, because then you'll obviously ruin the relationship, which you don't want.
For sure. Yeah, there's so much tact that goes into it. We talk about emotional intelligence, and that's where all that comes in. But I love that patience and persistence, because obviously, trying to develop that relationship and get that access is just, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. So
it really is. And it's a delicate line you don't want to cross it. You don't want to email blast, every couple of weeks. You want to pick and choose when. Maybe as an upcoming regional conference that they're going to be attending. Maybe they're going to attend a national conference. Maybe you're noticing that they're going to be presenting at a Congress, and you could say, I know what you're presenting. So there's a lot of different ways that you can tactfully, get access to folks.
Yeah, for sure. So obviously that ties into, and let's call it metrics or performance and internal pressures. So what types of internal pressures do you feel are challenges and create difficulties for MSLs, and how do they overcome those?
And I think there's always an anxiety once somebody hears the word metrics, right? Generally speaking, when you're an MSL, you hear the word metrics, you're like, oh, okay, what's the number here? What's the bottom line, right? What do you really want me to achieve here? And I hate the word metrics. I'm not a fan of it. I know I'm sure some people that are listening have heard that too before. But there is a reality where that it's not just about what your manager and you as the MSL are trying to achieve, hitting a certain number, if you will. But it's also, how is the larger organization perceiving you and perceiving the MSL team?
Yeah.
Right. We're not directly correlated with sales. So we can't say, oh yeah, the MSL team is generating script count by 20%. That's not what we're there to do. And that's not how we're evaluated. So there has to be some type of way to measure folks. And this is more on a macro level to larger parts of the organization. And I will be the first one to say that just because an MSL hits a certain amount of number of interactions or meetings does not mean they are a successful MSL. I think it's a mix between quality and quantity. I think the quantity portion, where you see the metric number, that is really, to me, I say your medical footprint in the territory. You can't have quality meetings if you're not meeting people. So I think it's a give and take where, maybe a particular month, somebody may have a low amount of meetings, but maybe those meetings were an hour long and they were really robust discussions. And maybe it's going to lead to further discussions with other folks in the same institution. To me, that's more beneficial than going to a grand rounds and having a couple of 5-minute discussions or intros to folks that are going to supersede that metric number. Yeah. So I think it's a give and take. It's a balance between all of that, in all honesty. And I think it's having that discussion with your manager and also with the MSL to have an understanding of, how really are they going to be evaluated and what the real way is that's going to work out for everybody. I think it's really important to have that discussion up front.
Yeah.
Because it will only help everybody in the organization be successful.
Right.
And I think and there's been times where I've had struggles too, getting access, whether you're new to a company, new to a therapeutic area, and it takes some time. And I think there's always that pressure, right? Whenever we see a number, especially folks in our medical, we want to hit that number. It's just who we are. It's part of our personality. When we get a number, we have to hit it. And if we don't hit it, no matter what, we feel like we're not doing our job. And I think it's important to have that conversation, with your manager and also with other fellow MSLs too, who maybe have been longer at that company or have been longer in the industry. And they could tell you kind of how things really are, maybe than just a flat out number.
So it sounds like communication is a really important part of the equation so that you can make sure that you're communicating your value and your performance, things that may not be seen, like you said, the quality versus the quantity, and being able to report that properly and keep good track of exactly what you're doing, the value that you're bringing, even if it may not appear on this quantitative metric. I mean, does that make sense, or am I just making that up?
Yeah. And I think from the quantitative measure, there's the quality measure that I mentioned too. So failed rides do occur, so I think it's an opportunity for either the lead of the MSL team or other folks in medical affairs to join the MSL on some of their meetings with KOLs to see, how the discussions are going, and also insights. I think that's something that always gets kind of brushed under the rug a little bit. And every company has a different way of capturing insights, and there's different, compliance things that come on with what things you can count as an insight or how you should be recording it and whatnot. But I think that's really what's the most important thing. Yes, you're educating, you're providing value to KOLs, but you're also extracting information at the same time.
Yeah.
Provide feedback to the internal medical affairs to help bridge and build their strategy moving forward. So I think that is a really important dynamic where you're giving, but you're also extracting as well. And that's a savviness that is really important for an MSL to be successful.
Got you. That's a good one. I mean, I think that's important to, to be aware of and stay ahead of. What other challenges, what other difficulties do you see that you feel MSL should be aware of to try to stay on top of?
Sure. I think having territory management is very important. Most companies, most teams will provide you a KOL list.
Mm-hmm.
There'll be an Excel sheet and it'll give you like 100 KOLs and they'll say, here, this is your starting point. Or sometimes you may not have that luxury of having a KOL list where you may have to develop your territory from grassroots level. And that may happen too, depending if you're at a newer company and if they have an indication for something in the first time getting an indication somewhere, that might be a possibility. But generally speaking, I would say you would get some type of KOL list that'll give you a starting point. And then it's like, okay, you have this list and now what do you do with it? And who do I see first? How does it work? Do I see Dr. So-and-so from Florida or I see Dr. So-and-so from Virginia? Right. And I think there's different tierings that are provided of how you designate certain allocations to your KOLs, such as national, regional, local. And of course, the national folks are going to be those folks that are writing guidelines or head of organizations that are very influential in the medical community. So I would say that's really important. It's tiering, that's usually provided to you. But it's really all about, how often do I see these folks? How do I manage my time with these folks? And also how do I ensure that I'm seeing them on a cyclical basis, right? At an appropriate basis, not once every month or once every 2 months, or maybe that physician's only available to see me twice a year, depending on their availability. And I think that could be very overwhelming at times because unless you're keeping track of how often you're seeing folks and when you're seeing folks, I think you may get confused of when did I see Dr. So-and-so last? Do I have to go all the way into Viva and look at that to see when I saw them last? Or is there a place where I could easily see that for all my KOLs and kind of say, oh yeah, I probably should go to Indiana 2 weeks from now. I haven't been there in a while. I should probably see all the folks in Indiana as much as I can. And that's all about packaging your time because time is very valuable. And as I mentioned earlier, the traveling, if you're flying, that's going to take some time. Driving, I remember I've driven 4 hours to see a couple KOLs and it wouldn't make sense for me to drive 4 hours to see one KOL and drive 4 hours back.
Right.
Try to maximize your time. So you try to see folks, maybe in 2 consecutive days and stay all night in a hotel because it maximizes your time. Because when you're in the car, this is a frustration that I've always had is there's not much you can get done while you're driving.
Yeah.
You can take a conference call, you can call your other colleagues, but generally speaking, you can't be sending email while you're driving.
Nope.
So unless you're very tactful in doing that, I wouldn't recommend it, but it can be a challenge.
No, but you can listen to the MSL Talk podcast while you're driving.
Well, there you go. See, that's a nice plug-in right there.
Just throwing it in there. No,
that's but
it goes back to, the first thing you talked about was organization. So if you have good organizational skills, a lot of this stuff kind of falls in line when it comes to territory management. Sure. So I think that, a lot of these pieces they're intertwined. And the better you get at the different pieces, probably the less difficulties you're going to have. There's still going to be challenges.
Sure.
So as we look at all of these different challenges, right? It's not an easy job. We know that it's challenging to be an MSL. It's challenging to be a top performer as an MSL. So do you see is MSL burnout a real thing? And if so, as a manager, how do you motivate people to get past that?
I guess I have a follow-up question. When you mean MSL burnout,
Yeah.
do you mean the grind
Yeah.
of being
I
an
mean, someone that is
MSL?
just like, you know what? I'm just really having a tough time staying motivated because of all the responsibilities. And I'm trying to get, trying to make my numbers. I'm trying to get FaceTime. I'm trying to do the paperwork and I'm trying to be successful and trying to deal with the travel. And, or am I making that up? Is there really no such thing?
I think maybe partly there could be if
Okay.
you're flying everywhere left and right because the pressure is mounting. There's a lot of internal pressure that there has to be this high. Maybe like during a launch, right? Especially if you get an indication from the FDA. When in your launch mode, it's kind of all hands on deck, and you kind of anticipate that where you might be traveling almost every day that week. It could be, or even weeks. And it can be burned out at times when you're going to conferences or going to see your KOLs at different states and then going to a conference, piggyback on top of that.
Yep.
I think it's more, I don't think that burnout is more long-term and maybe more short-term, maybe for a period of time, which I think is expected. I think there's a lot of frustrations I think that could occur. Maybe not
Sure.
burnout, I would say frustrations, especially if you're having difficulty with access, because that's going to be very frustrating where you're kind of doing everything you can to your ability, especially now during the pandemic. It's a lot more difficult because you can't go into offices for the most part. And you're like, well, I can't see folks, this is difficult. Nobody's getting back to me.
Yeah.
What do I do? And I think it's really important to have those conversations with your manager to see how, you can be successful in your particular territory, because a lot more finer details for everybody. And also leverage your other MSLs. I think some of the best conversations that I've had with my colleagues, they may have certain tips and tricks that they've utilized. And I would feel comfortable doing that. And I think that's what makes a good team is everybody leveraging each other.
Yeah.
A lot of different backgrounds from various folks, whether you're a PhD, nurse practitioner, or PharmD, or PhD, or MD even.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of opportunities to leverage those people's expertise because they may give you a different perspective that you maybe not have thought of.
Yeah. No, that's great. So we'll change that. So it's not MSL burnout, it's MSL frustrations.
I think so. I don't really think it's burnout.
It's a severe, it's actually a pretty harsh word that I just made up. Like,
that's okay.
I don't know. I just made it up. So MSL frustrations, but that's great advice. Rely on your mentors, rely on your manager, whatever you're frustrated with, there's got to be somebody that has a good solution or a good,
sure.
Suggestion of how you get past it. Right.
Absolutely. No, it makes perfect sense. And one other key aspect too, I think, is, I know, we've touched upon many different topics, is managing just personalities. I would say KOL personalities and the approach to that. And I would say it's most crucial probably when you're meeting somebody for the first time, because you may not know, is this person going to want to talk about their personal life before we even talk about science?
Yeah.
Or is this person going to give me 5 minutes and they're going to give me 5 minutes to kind of tell them everything that's going on with the company?
Yeah.
And you're going to have that variation. And I would say in those instances to really see if you can get any insight on those folks, talk to your commercial colleagues, see maybe they could potentially give you some insight into, how their personality is, or maybe what they're doing in their institution, if it's allowed, of course.
Yeah.
And also maybe other MSLs or other medical affairs folks that may know who those folks are. I think it's really important because when you have an understanding of that person's personality or of how they are, it makes the meeting go a little bit easier, I would say, because you're anticipating how they're going to react rather than going into an office and say, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm the MSL from so-and-so company. How are you? And then it's like, okay, let's see how this is going to go. Because you can have an agenda in your head. And guess what? I would say 90% of the time that agenda gets derailed very quickly. There may be a phone call the doctor has to pick up in the middle of your discussion, in the middle of your introduction even.
Yeah.
And you're just introducing yourself for the first time. A nurse may come in with a patient problem. So there's a lot of different variables that do occur. And I would say you can't anticipate every single one because there's one that never gets old, I would say, but you do have to be ready for them.
Yeah. Listen, as Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan till you get punched in the face.
Well, hopefully that's not happening in anybody's office or even virtually.
Again, I'm a little harsh here. I'm a little
I can see that
today.
Burnout, Mike Tyson punching. I see the theme today.
We might have to re-record this podcast. It's too late.
I hope not.
No. Listen, it's been great. I mean, this is really awesome advice. So looking into 2021, and, obviously still COVID, we have a vaccine now, so hopefully we're at the tail end of it. But we're still in COVID and we still have a lot of challenges and restrictions just from the COVID piece of it,
sure,
let alone the challenges of just being an MSL. So what advice do you have for MSLs that are moving into 2021, hopefully coming out of the COVID pandemic, for them to really perform well and get through some of these challenges?
Sure. And I think, I could speak on behalf of everyone. I think you too. It's not just professionally, it's also personally too. This is affecting us in many different ways. And I'm hoping everybody that's listening to this, everybody's friends and family are safe during this time and have gotten through it thus far. I hope we are at the tail end of it, like you said, because nobody wants to be part of this anymore. And I feel like even last year, I felt like there were times where I would have target dates saying, all right, this will probably be the target date or probably be cleaned up by then. We'll move forward from this date on. Yeah. And then before you know it, delay. Here we are in January 2021. And I foresee this continuing probably to end of the second quarter, early third quarter, where it's going to be the consistency we've seen in 2020. I will say, however, I think some institutions are opening up a little bit more depending where you live. I'm not going to say the large academic institutions. I would say probably more of the smaller private practice institutions, because they can have the autonomy to make up their own policies. So I will say that that's starting to bud right now, but I think really it's going to be the same that we're foreseeing now that we're going to see in the next few months. Hopefully the vaccinations do get distributed a little bit better and we are able to have the opportunity to get full immunity. But I really do think that's going to be kind of the mainstay. And I would say the same word that I kind of mentioned before, patience. I know a lot of folks, some people like the virtual environment from a KOL perspective, some do not. I will say this may change the industry a little bit. I've heard a lot of different, medical affairs leaders, maybe last year, saying this is totally going to change the way MSLs are going to be doing their business. I don't foresee that being the issue. I foresee it changing a little bit where virtual will be an option. Okay. I don't think it's going to take over face-to-face and that human interaction, because you cannot get that same type of feel virtually than you can face-to-face. It's just not going to happen. So that's where I see the real trend going, but I don't foresee it flip-flopping completely.
I agree. I tend to agree with that. I think that we are, especially in this role, so much relies on that human interaction that I think we do have this new tool and this new avenue of communication that we really didn't utilize before, which is video, which I think is going to serve a purpose. But I think that we're going to get back to live interviews, live meetings, live conferences, and scientific, meetings and advisory boards. Like, I think that that's all coming back. I really do. And I hope Absolutely. It is. Don't you want to get back out there?
Listen, I think when the reason you're become an MSL is partly, is because you want to, be face-to-face with folks. You didn't become an MSL to sit in front of your computer all day. I mean, there's times where we do some administrative stuff. And, I like being on my computer once in a while, but I also like to be out there talking to doctors. That's what makes the job so fruitful and so rewarding, is your day is different every day and your discussions are going to be different and people's backgrounds are going to be different. So that's what makes the job so rewarding and so refreshing. And talking science, I like to call it nerding out. I really do. I love it. I'm a nerd. I'm a dork at heart. I mean, to be honest, but I enjoy that. And that's why, I think taking this role is really important. And when you don't have that human interaction, I feel like it's just not the same. And, I've had meetings face-to-face like this, virtually, done field rides virtually, and it's just not the same. It's just, it's nice because they may give you more time because they are blocking it off in their calendar and they usually are in their office. They have to be in their office. Rather, if you go face to face, they may be seeing a patient that's going over and you're in the lobby for a half hour. So there's pluses and minuses, but I would say you have to make the most of it, what the current environment is.
Yep.
And I know that there's pressures that are being implemented, for the field now, in general, everywhere, because it's like, well, we have a business to run, but also I understand it's COVID too. So it's, again, that line, and that's hopefully going to get better as, the pandemic kind of.
I'm sure it will. So last question.
Yeah.
What one piece of advice do you have for MSLs to help them find success?
I think one big thing is never stop to continue to learn. Mm-hmm. I think that's something that I've even taken for myself, because you're never going to learn too much. And I think being open to that and really taking it home that, I have a little bit more to learn, and leverage everybody's, ask questions. I'm somebody who likes to ask a lot of questions. I was always known for asking too many questions, but I think I like to ask questions for clarity and for understanding, and to really understand why things are done, why things are being done the way they're being done. It just gives me clarity and helps me move forward about anything I'm doing. Mm-hmm. Whether it's setting up a meeting, setting up, being a lead for a Congress, making a presentation. Ask questions, ask people who have been experienced in those areas. How have you done this? What has worked for you? What have you utilized on this slide that's really worked? What resonates? What doesn't resonate? I think just being open to learning and continuing asking questions is going to help you be successful, because when people see you asking questions, they think, oh, wow, you're looking to gain more insight and you want to be successful. And always try to challenge yourself too. That's also important. Because I will say, you said burnout before, and I think not just burnout, but I think there could be some apathy that occurs down the road, potentially, if you're in doing the same routine over and over again, and you're not gaining anything, mm-hmm. right? And I'm not saying it's going to happen to anybody, and it hasn't happened to me in my career, but I have seen it occur in others where, they've done the same routine, same therapeutic area, have relationships, but they want more. And, ask for more projects potentially that are available. There's other ways to challenge yourself, but
sure,
I'd always say keep that in mind too. And
awesome.
You have to be happy with what you're doing.
Great advice, man. Jonathan, I greatly appreciate you coming on. You were awesome. This is some really, really good stuff. And I wish you well. Again, thank you for coming on. Sure. And for all you do.
Sure. I appreciate it. And if there's any other further topics you want to discuss on the road, I'm happy to be here.
I'll be calling you, man. We'll do this again.
I appreciate it. All right, Tom. Good seeing you, and we'll touch base soon.
All right, buddy. Sounds good, man.
Right. You too.
Thank you so much for listening to the show. If you've enjoyed it, please subscribe so that you don't miss episodes in the future, and feel free to leave a rating or a review or a comment. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.